20 years of incident response in APJ. So just do a quick intros. Watashi no namae wa na. Mark Goudie desu.
I'm Mark Goudie.
CrowdStrike
I am in the CrowdStrike Asia Pacific, Japan.
My friends in Japanese, but also for everybody else, Mark Goudie. I'm the Services Director for CrowdStrike across Asia Pacific and Japan. Been around for a long time doing incident response in many different organizations, mostly in professional services, but I've also done in-house incident response probably about 20 years ago when I first started this amazing career, amazing things that we've seen and done across the region. So how do you distill 20 years into 35 minutes? The answer is you fail. I wanted to go through all of these things that are on the screen. Yeah, this is basically a mind map. This is how I think. This is how I put things down and how I organize myself, my head, my team, my day even. So I can't talk through everything here, so I'm going to cherry pick the hopefully the best parts. Please, if you have something that you want to delve into deeper, even something I don't necessarily talk about today, please hit me up in the Slack channel. I'm very happy to talk to you about whatever subject you want to go into. So I'm going to cherry pick various things out of this presentation to fit in within the bounds of time. I really wanted to start off with the technical elements. I'm only going to hit one here. Really just going to look at the MFA part. I could talk about patching, which I heard was just talked about before. Logs, which I heard about ingesting and hearing about bringing log data into SIEM. I think Nick spoke about technical deployment and something which does hit very neatly with patching is also surges that we do see with incident response lately. Not going to have time to go into all that today, but I'd say, and this is something I've said many times to organizations, if you must do one thing to protect the organization, you must have multi-factor authentication enabled. And hopefully everyone here is thinking, what we've got MFA installed, but you would be amazed at the number of breaches that CrowdStrike deals with on a daily basis where basic multi-factor authentication has not been properly installed on, whether that's on the VPN or whether there's an exposed RDP or SSO or Citrix or SSH is exposed to the internet. And this is the initial vector. Having that full picture of a robust MFA that's got proper enrollment, has got tampering, anti-tampering in place. We're seeing some actors now getting into the SSO and installing their own identity providers, such that you can't even see a password reset anymore. You can't even see login failures because they're installing their own identity provider. The MFA also needs to be adaptable. We've seen actors that are really focusing on push fatigue. Like if someone's hammering away at trying to log into an organization, someone eventually is going to push yes to make the SSO, or make the MFA push go away because they're just sick of listening to it at 2 o'clock in the morning or whenever it is. This morning I was listening to a call whereby an actor, actor that we call Scattered Spider, did an amazing social engineering job to get into an organization and install their own tools. All these ways around multi-factor are becoming the norm. We have to be very adaptable. And if we could say, if you could take one thing away from this presentation and you forget everything else, take this one away, please, and action it across your organization and your clients' organizations. There is no team sport quite like incident response. One of my team, interestingly, said to me just the other day that there are no rock stars in incident response. There's only rock bands, and I think that was a really great saying that I think we can all do more of, and really understand that none of us can do this together. None of this can do incident response without without understanding and having a wide perspective on many things. These are the subjects that I want to talk about today, but I'm going to talk about just these three. First one, I think, is probably the most important: have a North Star, having a plan. And one that I think is quite interesting is more is not merrier. Having a North Star. This industry is a very difficult industry to work in. You need to have a guiding principle, have something that gives you direction, because you're going to get challenged. Your morals are going to be questioned. Organizations and companies and individuals may ask you to do things which are not consistent with your values. If you have a North Star, a defining principle by which you live by which you conduct yourself by during an incident, knowing what that is critical to being successful and surviving for a long time in this industry. This is a very tough industry to survive in. It's constantly changing. Actors are evolving. We've got more and more competition. We've got more and more different actors doing more amazing things. But if you just have a guiding principle, the one that we use at CrowdStrike is we stop breaches. If anything happens during an incident, what we do, the moral, our guiding principle is stop the breach, work out what it's going to take to stop the breach, because that's the next thing that we need to be focusing on. Always having that in mind, always having that as a guiding principle is the way in which we approach all incident response. That may not work for your organization. Have a North Star, have something which, like a rally, something that everybody can gather around and have as a principle that everyone can use. That way, if your team always acts and they're always going towards the one direction, always going north to the North Star, that way you can ensure you're going to get more consistency with the outcome. Your leadership can back you because they know what you're going to do. You're going to have the ability to get to the answer that you want to get to quicker. This is an interesting one, and one that I've been thinking about ways to position this. I've seen over the years of doing incident response where more and more and more services are being outsourced. A recent example I can give you is we're working for an organization that had outsourced a platform to a particular vendor. And then that organization had outsourced some of the security management to another vendor. So you had a managed service provider, you had a firewall service provider, had an application service provider, and we're coming in as yet another incident response organization. We've got more and more of these vendors turning up. And with this prevalence of vendors, what we find is that they're all doing their own they're all logging in their own way. Nothing is consistent. And when you're trying to do event correlation between all these different sources, it makes it extremely difficult. You lose the visibility of the attack path very quickly. It takes you a long time to try and get all of the different angles together to work out what happened. The outcome, unfortunately, is the investigation gets slowed down because you're trying to stop a breach, but you're fighting the technology to try and bring all this data together. So the only time it gets aggregated is during an incident. Really, we need to have a better plan for getting this data aggregated beforehand. You can even get a mismatch between the objectives of what these individual vendors want to achieve and the outcomes and the objectives of the investigation. All of this results in an attacker spending more time on target. They will have a higher business impact. There will be more damage done to the victim organization. What we'd really like to see is, we probably cannot change as incident responders. We can't change the behavior of the organizations that we're working for or with. What we can do is understand some of these issues and be prepared for that. Look for ways in which you can aggregate this data better or quicker, or potentially do it beforehand. This would be a great tabletop scenario to run. Tabletop scenario to run an incident where you've got multiple different vendors, and talking about aggregation and correlation of events would be extremely interesting as a tabletop scenario to run. So this is my more is not merrier scenario here. Those that fail to plan to fail. I can't remember who it was that first said it is no longer if, but when an organization will be breached. And those that do best will have a plan to deal with an incident. And one of my phrases that I say quite often is the difference between a security incident and a headline is a plan for dealing with an incident. Having a good incident response plan can save an organization from being a headline, having a major security incident, having a major data breach. The difference can be having a plan for dealing with an incident. So many organizations have got a very generic plan or no plan at all. We often see organizations that have a plan, but then don't follow the plan because they don't have faith and they don't trust the plan. They don't exercise it. They don't regularly follow up on it. They don't regularly update their plan to deal with new technologies like cloud. I would imagine every presentation today has spoken about cloud. And if not, I'd be surprised. We need to make sure the plan is updated and reviewed regularly. If you have a good plan, you'll get a faster investigation. The attacker gets less time on target and a lower business impact, which is what we really want to get out of incident response. All too often, the attacker gets more time on target and does more damage to the victim organization because of a poorly designed or executed incident response plan. This is my favorite section of this presentation, or misconceptions, or all of those things that drive me crazy with security around the region, and something I wish everybody would hear and be able and do something about, or at least understand a bit better. Can't talk about them all, but the ones I'm going to go through today is some of the misconceptions about how fast a breach happens. Gone in 60 seconds. Some organizations we see end up with multiple tools in the environment. My favorite, actually, they're all my favorite, having a malware problem and an attacker is only in a certain part of the network. That last one for my friends and colleagues in Japan, that's something that we do see a lot, particularly with Japanese multinational organizations only focusing on a very specific part of the network. Let me go into those in a bit more detail. The few scenarios that I want to look at is in a ransomware incident, and this is like the common type of ransomware incident that we're seeing a lot of at the moment. Is you see a ransomware actor coming in through a compromised device, or compromised credentials over a VPN or some other gateway into the organization. And then within a couple of days, they've got their way onto some critical servers. And then like 3 or 4 days into an incident, they're starting to copy data out. At this point, we've got a data breach. But we're talking about 3 or 4 days. A lot of the ways in which organizations that we work with, they think that this has happened in 60 seconds or just a few minutes. They watch too much Hollywood stunt hacking, whereas we often see these types of incidents taking many days for eCrime actors. But then the first time where you start to see the business starts to understand what's going on is when there's some availability impact, or there's a deployment of ransomware. In this instance, in this particular example, this actor, the Karakit group, they just put a readme.karakit on every desktop through the organization, telling the victim that they've stolen all the data and they're just in it for the money. So it really takes, often these incidents are taking about a week. There's a lot of time for you to be doing proactive hunting, for you to be detecting the actor even before they get into the organization and start copying significant amount of data out over various network shares. The next one I wanted to talk about was a nation state attacker, a group that we call Wicked Panda. We use various names for actors. You can probably guess where Wicked Panda comes from. They're a Chinese affiliate group which does a lot of attacks around the APJ region. So we do see them very active. This particular incident was a critical national infrastructure. The attacker came in over the vendor network and went and created all these backdoors through so many different parts of the organization. They then created web shells to come in through a different channel. This is only a part of the attack map, and we saw so many different fragments of threat actor tooling around the environment, so many different ways for the actor to come in and out of the organization. And the victim was wondering how this happened and how long was the attacker in the environment for. The best we could work out was it was at least 5 years. Most of the time when we're detecting and responding to an incident with a nation state attacker in there, it's a multi-year breach. The attacker has been going through the environment for an extremely long time because they've remained undetected. There's so many ways, what Chad was talking about when he was at CrowdStrike years ago. This is a type of scenario that Chad was talking about. You put technology in a certain part of the network and it starts lighting up very quickly to show you where the attacks or where actors are carrying out their activities. These types of incidents often run for many years. It's not to say incidents don't happen quickly. We're starting to see a lot more of that in the past few weeks, or months and weeks. But this is your typical timeline that you will often see for a nation state attack, particularly around APJ, where we often don't have a lot of maturity in response. We're often seeing with the tooling, like EDR tooling, for example, we're often seeing a split between the way in which servers and workstations are deployed, or Linux and Windows, or different business units are doing different things. It gets back to having that real difficulty again in event correlation, and you start to lose the visibility of the attack path. There seems to be a thought process with some organizations that if I use vendor A here and vendor B there, I'm going to get the best of both worlds, because I've got two different vendors. I've got a better chance of one of them, at least one of them, seeing what's going on. I think that's a really bad idea. Put all of your eggs in one basket. Get your technology up to speed with getting visibility and the best you can out of the one tool that you're going to go with to do your detection and response. The outcome you're going to get is, with a multi-tool approach, is you're going to slow down your investigation. You're going to end, and the net result, more business damage, because the attacker gets more time on target. You've seen a couple of themes here in the misconceptions and other parts. I really don't like investigations being slowed down by technology, and I really, really hate attackers getting more time on target, because that just creates more damage to the victim organization that we're trying to protect. This is one of the founding principles of the organization I work for. You do not have a malware problem, you have an adversary problem. Very, very common in APJ. People think that you can simply delete the malware, rebuild servers, rebuild workstations, put them back into production, and it's all good. Now we've got rid of the attacker. You've got rid of the malware. You have not gotten rid of the adversary. You have not addressed the underlying problem to how the incident started. The attacker is going to come back. They might, and as you saw in the nation state example I provided earlier, the attacker was in there for 5 years, to the best that we could determine, potentially longer, in some critical infrastructure for a particular country. The attacker had so much time on target, and the victim that we are working with was really thinking, well, I'll just re-image those servers and we can get back to business. But they didn't. It took them quite a while to come around to the thought of, we have to address how the adversary first got into our organization, get that visibility, fix that tech debt of many years that you've got, and then the victim was able to get themselves into a place where they're much better protected and aware of the problems that they've got. They're able to deal with the adversary now because they've dealt with the underlying actors. Okay. Apologies, this is rendering very slowly. The two main groups that we'll talk about a nation state and eCrime. eCrime is very opportunistic, and nation state is extremely focused. Nation state attackers are attacking the confidentiality of your organization. They're most likely not going to be focusing on the availability or integrity of your data, whereas eCrime actors are much more around, often will be focusing on attacking the confidentiality of your data, but also the availability of your data. And that's where we often see often see victims are more worried about the availability of data and systems being compromised. Organizations should think about what groups are going to be focusing on them. The one here I didn't bring up is hacktivists. We see very, very little hacktivist activity. Across my career, I've seen arguably one incident I've responded to has been for a hacktivist group that was probably that I strongly believe was a nation state anyway. But it was a hacktivist type of incident. It's not something that is a big deal, something that needs to be focused on a lot in our region, in my experience. If we look at the big four adversaries that we talk about, China, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Iran, and Russia, again, focusing on what matters here, what matters in APJC, what matters, I would imagine, to the audience that we're talking about from a nation-state adversary's perspective. We see very, very little activity from Iran and Russia. They're not very active in our region. China is number one by the hugest margin. We do see a bit of activity from DPRK, particularly around cryptocurrency, crypto exchanges. They're often focused on gaining access to cryptocurrencies to fund some of the programs, particularly we believe the weapons programs that you see coming out of DPRK. If you're going to be focusing on threat groups that you're responding to in this region, I would not be terribly worried about Iran and Russia. China and DPRK are the ones to focus on. The other two, not such a significant concern in my experience over 20 years of responding to incidents in this region. I'll just read this because I think it should resonate with everybody. Your ability to defeat advanced cyber threats rests almost entirely on your understanding of the problem. Understanding the actors, understanding what they're trying to achieve is critical to understanding the outcome, understanding what the attacker is going to do next. This is going to impact your ability to stop a breach, minimize the impact of the attacker in the victim organization. So understanding the cyber threat is the key to understanding the problem. You do not have a malware problem, you have an adversary problem. This is the last one that we see. Attacker is only in a particular part of the network. I think this is often driven out of a concern of cost. Also, we do see this being driven out of cybersecurity of a particular organization is only responsible for one particular business unit or a country. You know, maybe the CISO for Japan is not the same CISO for the US or Australia or Singapore or Thailand or whatever the situation might be. So we do see this split up of the way an incident is often investigated. We literally got an incident today for a victim organization where we identified a particular threat group, threat actor in one part of their network. I think it was about 2 years ago. And today we've identified, oh, that attack is in another part of your network that was out of scope. for our incident 2 years ago. So the attacker has had another 2 years of access to the victim network. And I think the reason for this is that networks do not follow organizational structures. Networks, even international networks, are very often flat. Organization structures, put lines on pages, and you guys report to this part of the business, you guys report to that part of the business, and that's the way that these incidents are managed. People go into various parts of the network and only see their small parts, and that makes an incident run for much longer. So we need to be focusing on giving the incident response team the same scope that the attacker's got, critical to getting a good outcome for your incident. So some quick takeaways for you. 5 things I would like you to remember. The same incidents are experienced globally, but response varies wildly across response maturity. Is very different across the APJ region. Did talk about multi-factor. It's pretty dull, but it's also very effective. Dull and effective is still effective. If it works, it works. Having the ability to focus on what is important, having a North Star, what's your guiding principle, will help you focus. And I wrote Chad spoke about when I was working at Verizon. I wrote a blog about proper preparation. Proper prior preparation prevents poor performance. That ended up in one of the DFIRs. It's still absolutely true today as it was 10 or 15 years ago when I wrote that. Having the preparation is what's going to save you or your organization from being a headline. Lastly, where are we going? I think availability is going to continue to prevail over confidentiality, especially in less mature organizations. So organizations have got nation state attackers and ransomware actors in their network. Obviously, we're dealing with the ransomware incidents first, but then they're not sure how to deal with the nation state incident at the same time. We're going to keep seeing spiders, the eCrime actors. They're going to keep smacking us. They're going to keep getting faster and faster. The last one is eCrime actors are picking up the pace. We're seeing some incidents with eCrime actors where they're getting into an organization within hours. They're carrying out attacks on target within hours. And hopefully we can just focus on one last thing here. Cloud IR we've all been talking about it for years, but now we're seeing this cloud IR is becoming something that is really a major concern. If you're not able to do cloud IR today, you need to get upskilled in cloud to continue working in this industry, because we're all becoming cloud incident responders. Thank you very much. Looks like I'm handing back to Nick, and I really appreciate your time today.